my name is Fiona Copeland, and I'm going to talk to you today about the power of the patient advocate. I'll give you a little brief agenda so that I can tell you, you just know what to expect. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about why I'm a patient advocate, and then our family rare disease story. And then I'll talk to you about PCD, which is the rare disease that our family are mostly affected by. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how I have in my life, since my children have been diagnosed with this rare disease, have helped improve patient care by being a patient advocate. And then I shall talk to you about how I think that you might be able to recruit patients in your work and what benefit they are. And then I'll just give you a quick summary. So this is the reason I'm a patient advocate. This picture was taken a few weeks ago when I was honoured to receive a British Empire Medal from the Queen in recognition of raising awareness of rare disease. And my children have a condition called primary ciliary dyskinesia, which I'm going to explain to you what it's all about. But as you can see, they're looking extremely well here, and they're both doing really well. And my husband also has a genetic condition which affects his eyes, and he has something called retinitis pigmentosa, which means that he's gradually losing his sight. And then our wider family have also been affected by genetic conditions, and we, so I'm very passionate about raising awareness of all of these rare diseases. But my mum is affected by something called a rare form of dementia, which is called primary progressive aphasia, which affects her ability to process languages. And I have a nephew who has a condition called HUWE1, which means he has development delays, amongst other things. And my brother also unfortunately died of bowel cancer some time ago now. But it was discovered after he died that he had something called Lynch syndrome, which is a predisposition to have nasty cancers. So as you can see, our family have been well and truly hit by the genetic stick, and so I think it's something that I'm really passionate about, is to making sure that people are aware of rare diseases and how it can affect other families. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story. So our story really started back in September '95 when our first baby was born, and everything seemed to be fine. He was a little bit late, but nothing to be worried about. And he came out quite normally, no major issues. But he had a bit of a cold and he had a bit of a runny nose when he was born, but no one seemed to be bothered about that. But even from a very tiny baby, the health visitor used to comment about his cough. But he had the odd pack of antibiotics, but nothing major at all. But then in September 1997, 2 years later, our second baby was born. And he also had a runny nose and a cough at birth, but he actually ended up in special care baby unit. As you can see from this picture, he was the fattest baby there. But he had pneumonia and was quite poorly, and he had to have 3 weeks worth of IV antibiotics in order for him to be released from hospital. But he continued to have repeated chest infections, and he was on drugs for asthma, which had a little bit of an effect, but not a major effect. But he also had hearing loss and late speech development, so he wasn't hitting his milestones as well as his brother was. But when we got to Ewan, the eldest one, started school, he started having time off school because he wasn't very well. He'd be sick, or he'd get a cough, or he'd throw up over the teacher, which was a regular occurrence in the morning. So they'd be sick on the way to school in the car. And the teacher at school said it's just not normal for a child to have this much time off in his first term of school. I think you should take him back to the doctor. So we went back to the doctors. And that's where our diagnosis story started, really. So we went to see the GP. The GP said, nothing wrong with him. He might have asthma. You're not using the medication correctly. Do this, do that with the medication. So we had summer holidays where we were religiously giving him his antibiotics and his inhalers, and he didn't seem to get any better at all. And then the GP said, well, I'll do an X-ray. So he did a chest X-ray, and then he made an urgent referral to a local hospital. I thought that they were being very efficient because the urgent referral was that he had an appointment the next day. And what I didn't know at the time was the GP was extremely worried about you and the results of his chest x-ray. So we went to the local hospital, and the local hospital said, why has no one ever sent this child to see me before? And I said, well, I don't know. You know, we're going to the GP. He said, he's got chronic lung disease. And at the age of 6, he had a third of his lung had bronchiectasis, which meant that it was permanent lung damage. And he had, when they did a physical exam of him, they realised that his lungs were actually growing out in a weird position because they were so damaged. So he had a flared rib cage, and he had clubbing of the fingers where he wasn't getting enough oxygen to the end of his fingers. And he was just generally, he was a proper poorly little boy. And the doctor said to me, you know, have you noticed he's got funny fingernails? And I said, well, I've got 2 children and they've both got the same fingernails. And I hadn't at the time ever really looked at children's fingernails, but actually Gregor had exactly the same problem as Ewan did. So Gregor was also brought into the hospital and they had a look at him. Fortunately, he didn't have as much bronchiectasis as his big brother, but he had a little bit of damage to his lungs, but not as much. But he did have a clubbing of the fingers, and he was the one that was suffering with the problems with his ears and his hearing. And so then they decided it could have been one of 3 things. It could have been autoimmune deficiency, but as you can see from this picture, they both look too healthy for that. It could have been cystic fibrosis, which they ruled out quite quickly, or it could have been this very rare genetic condition, which called primary ciliary dyskinesia. And so we had to have that confirmed. So they went to a specialist hospital in London where they had a cilia biopsy, where they take a little bit of put a brush up your nose, take a little bit out of the epithelial cells out of your nose, look under a microscope, and then they confirmed probably about 3 months later that the boys had PCD. So what is PCD? So primary ciliary dyskinesia is a rare genetic disease, and it affects about 1 in 15,000 people in the UK population. But there are pockets of in the UK where consanguineous marriages are more popular, so it's the high incidence there. But generally, it's about 1 in 15,000, and it's recessively inherited. So I have a faulty gene. My husband has the same faulty gene, and we've come together and created children with PCD. And we have a 1 in 4 chance of passing that on to any babies that we have. So we're a bit unlucky to have 2. And basically what it means is that the cilia hairs that line your bronchial tubes, and they're also in other parts of your body, but mostly their biggest function is in your bronchial tubes, and they sweep secretions out of your lungs. And because they have a defect in the actual structure of the cilia hair, so if you cut a cilia hair in half, you can see the structure of it, and it looks a bit like a pomegranate cut in half. It's got little round doublets, I think they're called, radial spokes, and Ewan and Gregor have got something actually missing in the ultrastructure, which stops the cilia from moving properly. And so basically it stops it moving properly, and then it means that the secretions that normally naturally just naturally swept out of your lungs get stuck in the bottom of your lungs, and you have to kind of replicate that by doing physiotherapy to kind of shape the lungs to get the gunk out of the bottom of the lungs. And if you don't have PCD, you basically don't notice that your the cilia are moving, and sometimes occasionally you might notice it. So if you go running and then it makes you cough, it's because the cilia are just trying to get the gunk out of your lungs, and it'll just automatically come and sit at the top of your lungs, and you can feel the mucus sitting there and think, oh, where did that come from? And it's your lungs have just got secreted it out. So, but it can affect your lungs, your ears. It sweeps secretions out of your ears, out of your sinuses, and it also has a role in your reproductive organs. So it will help the eggs move along the fallopian tubes, and it will make sperm swim. And the disease, the spectrum of the disease severity is different depending on what your cilia ultrastructure defect is. And now genetics is beginning to show us what we can, what your phenotype is going to be. So if you have a particular type of PCD, genetic cause to your PCD, then we can probably say to you that actually you might have, because you have this gene, you have more receptivity to having really bad lung disease, but your sinuses are fine, or other people have more problems with their sinuses and their hearings and their lungs are not too bad. So, but generally it's the lungs that we want to make sure we can preserve for as long as possible. And then there's other things that you can have when you have PCD. So some patients have what they call situs inversus, where all of your lungs are reversed, which is great for the doctors to have a look at you. But when they like to see that you've got all of your organs reversed, it doesn't really affect anything else generally. It's just that it's, if someone listens to your heart, it's a bit faint if they listen to it on the wrong side. But the big thing about PCD is it's not really very easy to diagnose, because the symptoms are very similar to the things that normal children get, like coughs and colds. So life for us became quite difficult after diagnosis. So we ended up having to have lots of antibiotics, oral antibiotics, inhalers, nebulizers every single day. We had to learn how to do physiotherapy, which we had to get into our daily routine. So we had to do 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night for both boys. That was quite a challenge. We also had long hospital stays for IV antibiotics, and then quite often they would have bronchoscopies, so they put a camera down their nose and have a look in their lungs and do a bit of a sucking all out the gunk. So so we become regulars in hospital, and then what would happen is that one of them would become unwell and then they'd cross-infect each other. So we'd end up with both of them in hospital at the same time, and quite often up to 3 weeks, which was pretty tough for them, but for us, a family, was also quite difficult to manage. But then as they got a bit bigger and they got more used to having IVs, then we started doing them at home. So we learned how to do home antibiotics, which was made much easier for us as a family to manage our other, activities like work and things like that. But it also meant the boys got to sleep in their own beds, they got to eat their own food, and they generally got much better quicker if they were having IVs at home. So that's not available for everybody, but it was very useful for us as a family, particularly as we had the 2 kids. So and then obviously there was lots of hospital appointments for clinic appointments, hearing assessments and physio and everything. So, and then as the boys got bigger, they'd had so many IVs that their veins started to collapse. They had to have portacasts put in, which were permanent access lines. So they weren't very well when they were small children, but they were really well managed by the hospitals that saw them. And then there's also the social and educational issues that you have when you have children with a long-term chronic condition. So, the boys missed a lot of school. Their education suffered, but their friendship groups were difficult to maintain. And they were both really keen on sport, and they would do really well in getting into the first team at school, and then they'd have 2 or 3 weeks off, and then they'd be dropped from the team and they'd have to start again. And that was quite difficult for both of them as they grew up. But now, really pleased to say that they're both doing really well, and they're now young adults, and they're doing all the things they should be doing and forging careers which are massively interesting, and we're super proud of them. So, but when the boys were diagnosed, it quite quickly came apparent to me that there wasn't a lot of knowledge about PCD around the country. The GP had never heard of it. The consultant that we saw at our local hospital only knew about it because he'd worked at the specialist hospital, and there seemed to be a lack of awareness it altogether. So we discovered that there was a support group, and so we joined that, and we saw that they were encouraging people to learn more about PCD. They were raising awareness of it. They'd set up a medical board. They were interacting with doctors and clinicians around the country to try and to improve the care that patients got. And so we got involved with that quite early on, and I became the chair of the group in 2003, and where I was there for 17 years. And our main role really was to influence patient care, and we really worked very hard with the clinicians and the doctors and researchers, not just here in the UK but around the world, to improve the care that patients got. And then we've also supported and encouraged research into PCD. So really, making sure that these doctors talk to each other, they do lots of collaboration, and we've, it's a long journey, but it's been hugely helpful. And then, more recently, we've been, helping patients get access to the right care that they need because of COVID. So, many of our patients were clinically vulnerable, and yet they didn't have the right codings on their letters for the NHS. They were, found that shouldn't be working when first COVID came out because of the environment they were working in, and it was very difficult for them to get the care they needed. And as patient advocates, we could help them, as a group care collective, the PCD Support UK could help them make sure that they kept safe during the COVID period, and that they were able to access the booster or the vaccinations as soon as possible and get the care that they needed. As you can imagine, if you have lung disease and COVID, then that's probably not a great mixture. So one of the things that we did do was work with some researchers in Germany to actually look at how PCD and COVID interacted, and that is still an ongoing study, which was really very much helped by the patient group, and continues to be by the patient group. But the thing that I'm most proud of in the work that I did with the PCD support group was that as a patient advocate, you can tell the people that deliver your services what you think of them, really, and you can try to help them identify how you can improve the services. And what happened with Ewan and Gregor, their story was that basically they were diagnosed in a research lab. There was no diagnostic service for patients in the year 2001, and they were looked after by a specialist hospital who had an interest in PCD. They were doing lots of research in PCD, or starting to do research in PCD, and so the boys were diagnosed in the research lab, and it's like, it was a bit of a postcode lottery on whether you could get diagnosed or whether you could get a referral to this hospital. And we were lucky that that's what happened for us as a family. But I didn't think it was fair that other families in the UK couldn't have access to this story. And it's not just children, it was adults as well who probably had PCD and they were struggling to get the diagnosis they needed. So we went to our families and we said, well, what do you want? So, where would you want to go? Do you want to go and see a local doctor to be diagnosed with PCD? Or would you like to go to someone that really knows what they're doing and it's a very rare disease? And so what ended up happening is that we set up 3 services in Southampton and London and Leicester, and we have now 3 services that you can get diagnosed with PCD, which is free to anybody in the UK. And then once we got this system set up, we said, well, we need to so after the diagnostic services in 2006, we continued to ask the clinicians, asking them about the managing condition, and they were saying, well, this is great, we've got this service, but really we could do with like a management service to manage our patients. So we were diagnosing children in 2006, and then in 2007 we published some PCD guidelines about how important it was you got diagnosed, and then what the management care package would be, what you need to have done in order to look after yourself. And then we found evidence to support all the services and everything. And then what happened then after that was that we could prove to the NHS that actually there was no point diagnosing people if we didn't have a great service to look after them. So from 2012, we had a paediatric management service. So all of our children could go and see a specialist in one of 4 centres. So we've gone from 3 centres to 4 centres. So now we have one in Southampton, London, Leicester, Birmingham, and up in the north in Leeds, Bradford. And we could, so all of our children have access to that service where they can see a multidisciplinary clinic, so they can see an expert in PCD, they can see ENT surgeons, they can see physiotherapists, they can see dietitians, and they can see get psychological support as well. And so that was from 2012. And then, of course, it was really very obvious to me that there was absolutely no point managing all of these children from diagnosis to paediatric service until they become adults, and then they're left with their own devices. And actually, we found that quite happens is these patients get really well looked after as when they're children, but then when they go into the adult services, they just fall off the cliff, and then they don't come back into the system until they're really unwell. So we could prove to the NHS by, again, asking our patients what they wanted, asking the clinicians what they wanted, and then we could go back to the NHS and say, really, there's no point spending all of this money on diagnosis and paediatrics if we don't have an adult service. So I always said that once I got an adult service up and running, I would resign as the chair. So my hand was forced when we managed to do it. I honestly didn't think we would ever manage to do it. But now we're really proud to say we now have 4 centres around the country that look after adults as well. And that has been really, really useful in the last year for those people that have been at home and shielding, and, you know, to know that they've got a proper team looking after their care. So, but as patient advocates, we can also make sure that these services continue to develop, and that there's always continuous improvement. And I know I'm extremely proud of this service. So the other thing that we've done, or I've done, is supporting research, and I've been a patient representative for numerous groups, but the biggest one that I'm still part of is the 100,000 Genomes Project, which was a project set up a number of years ago now about sequencing 100,000 people with rare diseases, and I'm the patient rep for the respiratory arm of that project. It means that people, you know, can get a diagnosis that they weren't able to before, where and it has really made the genetic research a lot more mainstream. So it's been a fantastic project, and it's been great fun working with the clinicians, you know, the wisest and cleverest doctors and researchers around the UK on the 100,000 Genomes Project. I've also worked with the Bronchiectasis UK group, which is just all about bronchiectasis, which is a group of clinicians doing research into bronchiectasis, and I sit on a number of their panels as a patient representative for their research. I was the respiratory group chair for the Royal Brompton Harefield Biomedical Research Group for a number of years, been part of the Ciliary research team, which was a European funded research group, which instigated a huge amount of research into patients with PCD, and it's a real collaborative worldwide group really, but it's funded by the European money. And then this year, of course, in the last 2 years, we've been working with the COVID PCD team, and although I'm not the chair of the group, I'm still very much part of an active group of that. So the other thing that we've also done is we set up the Ciliopathy Alliance, and again, this is really patient driven. So it was patients. We went to we work quite closely with other genetic groups. So we went to a group a meeting set up by Genetic Alliance at the House of Parliament, and so we went there and we were talking to other patients and groups, and someone said, oh, you know, I've got this, you know, this condition, and it's the cilia, it's related to cilia, and it's like, oh, is it? So there's lots of cilia in the human body that has different roles, and there's something called motile cilia, which is the one that we're affected by, or my patients are affected by. But there's also immotile cilia that can be found all around the body. And so we were talking to other patient groups and saying, oh yeah, ours is a ciliopathy. You know, ours is caused by cilia being faulty in the first place. And it's like, we're just like, oh, okay. So perhaps we should all get together and start to collaborate really about our disease group. So we got a group together, and we've managed to really kind of help people do more research into the basis of cilia, which will not just help people with PCD, but other diseases as well. So that's been really, really, an amazing achievement, and that was really through the power of patients. So how can a patient help you? So when I spoke to the respiratory GSIP about doing this talk, they said that they really valued the input that I've given to them about their research, because it's made them do a lot more translational research. So looking at people for longer term having longer term conditions, and they think that they really do have been able to, because they know that they're so well involved with patient advocates and that they are asking patients what they want, that it really does help them get them more funding and encourages collaboration with other groups, and then just the benefits have been enormous. So I think every doctor that has ever been involved with patients, helping them with their research and in developing their services, say that sharing the real life experiences of what it is like to have a child with a genetic condition, or even having the condition yourself, is really helpful to them. And sometimes you can just say one tiny little thing and they go, oh, I didn't realise that happened. So, because you're always, when you go and see a doctor, you're always talking about the symptoms that you have. Sometimes you forget that, that it's the other little things, like, I don't know, if you get puffed out walking up the stairs and you'd never tell anybody that you get puffed out the stairs. So sometimes you can have a conversation about something. It's like, oh, I didn't know that happened. Or, other examples is that I've been to meetings when people say, well, when we have this patient in, we're going to do this to them. And you're like, well, no one's going to let you do that to them. And they're like, oh, why not? And it's like, well, would you let them do that to you? And they go, oh, no, perhaps not. So, what is the treatment burden? Do you realise that if you are giving this child, 12 different medications, and one of them takes 20 minutes and the other one takes 30 minutes, by the time they've finished one lot of medication, they've got to start doing the next medication. So how's it affecting their child's whole life experience? So we, as patients, carers, advocates, or patients ourselves, we can really tell you what is actually happening in our life. So for me as a patient advocate, I have researched numerous applications for research. I've helped review those documents. I've helped put applications in. I've been part of writing papers for research. I've got, I think, over 26 papers with my name on it. I can help you prioritize your research. We can help you maintain the relationship between patients. You can help patients do research now that will help them now, but also help show patients that actually we need to have a balance between research for now and research for the future. We can give you patients can give you an external perspective. So before we became carers, or before we had rare diseases were in the forefront of our lives, we used to have normal jobs, and so we've got lots of experience outside of the NHS we might be able to help you with. We can introduce you to other patient groups, because it's a very close-knit community. We can help you, introduce you to other people. We can help disseminate any results you've got. We can do surveys of our members. We can talk to other people and to help you shape your patient care and your research. And I really do think it's invaluable to the people that have used my services in the past. So how do you recruit patients? So I think the most important thing is get close to your patient support group. So if there is one, you will find that if there isn't a formal one, there will be an informal one somewhere on Facebook or Instagram or something. The world is much closer now, and so even these very, very rare disease groups, there are patient support groups. You will find that there are some groups where you can access the patients. But once you've found a patient support group, or if you're disease group doesn't have one, then I'd encourage people to set them up, because they're invaluable, but that's a whole another talk. But offer to do some talks to their patient days, or write articles for their newsletters. Quite things like now, you used to have to go to a meeting and it would take a whole day out of your diary, and you can do an hour now on Zoom. And that's so invaluable for the patients to get to understand you as clinicians, but they can also get to see the human side of you a bit more, and I think that's really, really important. So, but once you build relationships, these things, then you can find someone who's got an interest in, a genuine interest in helping you achieve your goals. And that's how I was recruited, really, to do patient advocacy. One of the clinicians that diagnosed the boys asked me to become a patient advocate on a group at the Royal Brompton, and that was a general group that was about how the hospital ran and things, which was really, really interesting. But from that, I got more into the research side, and I've been doing that for like 18 years now, probably. So you know, look out for those people in those groups that might be able to help you. Look out for the super user of the thing, or the person with the biggest voice, you know. So, but people really would like to help you. They want to give you something back from the excellent care that they've had. So, you know, and people will ask. If you ask, they will, you know. But so invite them to your team or research meetings. Get them to come in and talk to you, tell you their story, and then so they can get to understand you a bit, and they can meet the rest of the people in your team. And then there's also excellent training for patient advocacy, and some on Involve website, but there's quite a lot available. So if you can, I would definitely recommend it. So just to summarise then, I think that patient advocates can really help you improve patient care and conduct research, and it's essential to do that, and it really will help you develop really good services, and you will also see the patient in a different way to how you see them as someone with a chronic disease. And then the real thing is that you don't need any special skills to be a patient advocate. You just need a willingness to be open and honest and share your experiences and opinions. And I think that's one of my key things. I'm always open and honest. So just to finish off then, I'd just like to say thank you to you and Gregor and the rest of my family for letting me tell my story, the PCD support group, the PCD National Service, and all the researchers and clinicians working with our patients. And thank you for having me.